when you do stuff like that, when you ride your bike instead of driving, eat less meat, that changes who you are as a person. And I think here too, economists, we tend to assume that people come into the world with fully formed identities and preferences. No, that's not the way it works at all. We become who we are gradually over the course of a lifetime. You're not who you were a week ago, and you become who you are by what you do.
Hello, friends and damn givers. Welcome to the Let's Give a Damn podcast. I'm your host, Nick Lapara, and this is the show where we chat with people who saw something wrong in the world and gave a damn about it. We hope that you will listen, learn, and begin giving a damn in your world today, wherever you may be. Now, we will continue to bring on incredible Black leaders in the weeks and months ahead. Why? Because we have so much to learn from them, and we have so many things to consider as our society and culture begins to make monumental changes. Today is not one of those days, but we do have a fantastic conversation lined up for you. Robert H. Frank is a professor of management and a professor of economics at Cornell, and he is the author of over a dozen books, including the one we are going to talk about today, Under the Influence, Putting Peer Pressure to Work. He is crazy smart, super sharp, and he is giving a damn in so many meaningful ways. Now, I read the book in preparation for our chat, and it's brilliant. I was going to give a review here, but decided I would just borrow a review from a Nobel laureate in economics, George Akerlof, instead. George had to say this about the book. Under the Influence describes a neglected goal for social policy to gently foster the wisdom needed individually and collectively to achieve the good life. Frank's own wisdom is on view in every paragraph of this book, with its brilliant perspective on and solution to the problems of our times. After I interviewed Frank a few weeks ago, I saw that Ezra Klein had him on the Ezra Klein Show, one of the most listened to podcasts in the entire podverse. So I knew I had made a great decision to have Robert on the show. Well, I knew before that because our conversation is fantastic, but I really knew then that I had made a great decision. I learned a lot and was challenged in some really profound and beautiful ways from talking to Robert, and I wish the same for you in the few minutes ahead. Before we jump into the conversation today, I want to give a huge shout out to this week's sponsor. Don't skip ahead, friends. By listening to the next few seconds and considering whether or not this is a company you'd like to check out, you are supporting the show in a massive way. Now, y'all know that I am very picky about who sponsors this show. And this episode of Let's Give a Damn is brought to you by my friends at RedCap, a fantastic Nashville-based company that makes workwear and uniforms. RedCap champions the men and women who are out there committed to making our communities thrive. Everything they make, from work shirts to coveralls, is crafted with purpose and on purpose. They're a no-bullshit company. What you see is what you get, and what you get is a group of people who genuinely give a damn about work and a life done right. From June 1 through July 31, you can get 20% off your first purchase at redcap.com using the promo code GiveADamn. That's redcap.com. Use the promo code GiveADamn from now until July 31 for 20% off. I also worked with them last month to interview some amazing damn givers that are beautifully contributing to their communities during this global pandemic. You can watch the entire From the Frontline series at redcap.com/community. Alrighty, friends, are you ready for the show? Here's my conversation with the brilliant Robert Frank. Let's go. So let us begin. We're going to talk mainly about your new book, Under the Influence, but before that, we're going to talk about your body of work, which is extensive. And I just want to rattle off in a few minutes some of the book titles and have you kind of abbreviate some of what you're trying to do there, because I talk with people who give a damn, and it is very obvious that you give a damn by the work that you've done in your past. Before we get to all of that, though, Robert, let's hear some of your story. I always want to begin with story because I think if you start describing the who, what, where that made you who you are today, like that really helps us figure out why you even, sometimes it helps us figure out why you even end up doing the kind of work that you do. So what's your story?
So a story. Okay. Let me start with graduating from college, I graduated from Georgia Tech in 1966. When I was a senior, I had been a math major there, and I think there must have been some deaths or sudden retirements or who knows what all happened, but they asked me, an undergraduate, to teach a freshman math course. And I had never taught anything before. I'm sure they would be embarrassed that I'm revealing to you that they had an undergraduate teaching a course for them. They must have been desperate, but it turned out I really liked doing it, and I think by what evidence I had, I did a good job at it. And so I decided then and there that I wanted to be a teacher, but to teach what? I didn't think I wanted to get a PhD in math. So the way we bought time in those days was to go on the Peace Corps. I went to Nepal for 2 years. I taught math and science in a village school there. And I think that experience, well, it was quite common for Peace Corps volunteers to think they wanted to become development economists. If you work in a developing
Sure.
country, that's a pretty natural career path to think about. So I applied to economics graduate programs while I was in Nepal. And I think the experience I had living there really set the stage for everything I've worked on since then. It was at the time, I don't think it is any longer, but at the time it was the poorest country that was on record in the UN data. They had the lowest per capita income, but it wasn't a miserable poor country. It was just low income, rural, basic, low material standard.
Sure.
And what I came away from that experience with was a sense that the drama of the human story is pretty much the same, even under radically different circumstances like that. People wake up in the morning, they have things on a to-do list. They have goals to accomplish. When they accomplish them, they feel good. When they don't, or when they lose, they feel bad. And so I think my career as an economist, I graduated with my PhD from Berkeley in '72, has been shaped by trying to follow up on some of those insights that I brought back from Nepal with me. And I think in many ways, the economic model is quite congenial to me. I like the idea of efficiency for trying to get the most out of the resources that you have at your disposal. But I think where I see economists missing a connection with the world is that they assume a set of goals for people that just doesn't seem to describe people as I see them. So we're trying to make our way. I think the Darwinian insight is a key one. I think of Darwin's central insight as being life is graded on the curve. It's not how much firepower you have. It's how much you have relative to those with whom you're competing most directly. So it's not if you're bigger than everyone else in the universe or stronger or faster. It's where you stand in local hierarchies that really matters. And so much of my writing has been about that. And for me, I felt lucky that I've gotten to pursue questions that just made me feel curious. One of the enduring mysteries in Darwinian evolution is how genuine honesty could survive in competition with nasty people. We know that there's a big payoff to selfishness in the world, but at the same time, there's really very compelling evidence that many people are not selfish in the narrow sense, and economists generally assume that they are. And so, how do people who are actually pretty decent, when you come down to it, how do they manage to compete effectively against people who cheat when no one's looking, and others? And so a lot of my work was about that. And it's a fairly simple story I stumbled on. It's that if you're the kind of person who won't cheat when no one's looking, it's true you pass up opportunities for gain, and there's a penalty to that in the evolutionary contest. But But if other people can tell that's the kind of person you are, and never mind how they would, but that's an
Sure.
interesting question by itself. If they can tell that's the kind of person you are, then suddenly you become an extremely valuable economic asset. There are all sorts of ventures that can't be carried out successfully unless one person can trust another to do the thing that has to be done, even though he'd profit by not doing it. So, so yeah, I've done a fair amount of work on that issue. The most recent work has led me to have more appreciation than I did in the wake of having done that work for the role of rules and enforcement. I think Aristotle's view of why people would be honest was a fairly interesting, simple story. It's that societies pass rules, they hire people to enforce them, and so lots of people obey the rules because they're afraid they'll be caught and punished if they don't do that. And in Aristotle's view, that caused them over time to just get in the habit of obeying the rules, and they became, in
Interesting.
effect, a law-abiding person by temperament. And so when an opportunity would come to break the rules when you knew no one was looking, well, that's not who I am. I don't do that. I'm wired up to be a different kind of person now. And
Interesting.
and so I think that really is an important part of the story. If we didn't have rules and enforcement, but the thing that really made me focus on the importance of that is the notion that when people see other people cheating and getting away with it, not paying a penalty, they feel like chumps when they see that, and there's a
Hmm.
huge, almost an explosive tendency to copy what people are doing. You feel like well, in a certain sense, you've been wronged in a situation like that. Other people are getting paid more than they deserve, and because people see that, more and more people do it, and that bids the wage down that you would earn by cheating. And so, if you don't cheat, you're actually paid less than you're actually worth in the marketplace. So yeah, there's a huge role for contagion in the decision of whether to cheat or not. So yeah, I've come from thinking about the role of context and relative resource holdings in what we do, and thinking about honesty and other forms of motivation. It's been lucky to get to do that kind of stuff. I've never had much interest in the excessive formalism that is the hallmark of much of modern economics, and having studied math, I was equipped to do that, but I didn't like doing that. And
Sure.
so the fact that I got to avoid doing that, I think of as a lucky break for me.
Yeah. So when I first encountered your work, right, and we set this conversation, or before we set this conversation up, I loved the book title, I loved the book concept, but I was like, yeah, I don't look out for economists to talk to, because when you think of economists or mathematicians, these people that work with numbers, data analysts, you're not thinking this is going to be a really like amazing conversation. And you pointed out something a few minutes ago that so many economists count on or think of people as selfish consumers, right? Whereas as I look at your body of work and what you just shared over the last few minutes, if this is even a thing, you seem to be a very people-focused, people-centered economist. You're not just looking at raw data and numbers. You're looking at the motivations behind why people do things. You've mentioned several philosophers so far, like and several different like big thinkers. You're going outside of the normal, like, oh, I'm an economist, so I read about the economy from other economists. You're looking at it it seems like from a very like big worldview, holistic kind of a thing, right?
I that doesn't quite resonate with how I think of what I do. I mean, I think I'm more of a small think kind of person maybe stumbles onto some things
Okay.
that lead to. So mainly, I choose topics when I see something that puzzles me. If I see something that doesn't quite parse, I can't come up with a cogent explanation for it, then I focus immediately on that and try to wrestle with it until I get something that's at least plausible sounding. One of my books was called The Economic Naturalist. I don't know if you came across that one in,
Yep.
any of the stuff you looked at, but it's an assignment I stumbled on years ago for my economics courses. I tell them pose an interesting question based on something you've actually seen or experienced yourself out there in the world, and then try to use basic economic reasoning to craft a plausible answer to it.
Hmm.
It's not a PhD dissertation, 500 words maximum. Students have to write 2 of these during the term. So the first one's, it's not so easy to come up with an interesting question. It sounds easy, but it's not. And many of the first round submissions are not interesting. I tell them, don't tell me how come we order out for pizza the night after we've been up studying for an exam all night. We're tired and it's harder to cook when we're tired. Oh, okay,
Sure.
yeah, that's right, but it's not interesting.
Not
I
interesting.
don't want to run down the hall and knock on my colleague's door and say, "Listen to this."
Yeah.
So coming up with an interesting question is the real battle in the assignment, and a few of them managed to do it on the first try. But what's encouraging to me is that a remarkably high percentage of them come up with a pretty interesting question on the second round, and so I think that's just by far and away the best path to doing research on any subject is just find something that puzzles you and fight your way through to an explanation that at least is consistent with the things you know to be true about the world off the top of your head. And then, I tell them it doesn't have to be the last word. It's not the final answer to the question. Think of it as a hypothesis suitable for further testing. And if you really wanted to do research about it, that is what you would go on to do as the next step. But yeah, I think for me, I count myself incredibly lucky to have been able to work on topics that I've come up with more or less in that way.
That's super helpful actually. That pushback that I am a very, we don't know each other from anything until 20 minutes ago, but I'm a very big picture thinker, always thinking of big ideas and big visions. And that by and large, when I hear somebody like you that has had such creative, that is asking very interesting questions, I automatically go to, well, he must be a big picture, big vision kind of person. And maybe the reason, one of the pushbacks I've gotten from my mentors over the years, and I still consider myself pretty young. I've got lots of career to figure out. I don't feel settled at all, even though I'm doing 100 different things right now. But one of my mentors, one of their biggest pieces of feedback for me consistently, every time we meet, every time we're talking and wrestling through something, is focus. Like, don't think so big picture about
Mhm.
everything. You will accomplish 10 times more if you can not even just focus. Like, just when you get something, when you get this idea that you think you should, really work out. One example right now is my book agent and I are working on my first book, and I like to write, but the problem I'm running into, and maybe this is just normal, but I think it does have something to do with my always wanting to figure it all out, right? In this big picture stuff. It is so much work right now to sit down and focus on one book proposal so that we can refine it and sell it. It's because I want to do all the books right now, right? I think that I have several books in me,
Uh,
and you've definitely have several books in you. You've already, 15 or something? And I feel like I have several books, and so I just get going with all these ideas, and I want to fit them all in, and now they're bleeding into each other. And how do I focus on this one thing versus letting all of
mhm.
my ideas? So that was really good and helpful pushback where you're like, no, actually, that's not how I see myself. I'm actually, to boil it down, like I heard you say, like I'm focused, and I'm asking these really good intentional questions, and they're all relatively within the same universe, right? You're not
Right.
going all over the place.
Yeah, I think a lot of my books have grown out of columns I've written for newspapers, and there you really have to focus. You've
Sure.
got anywhere from 700 to 1,000 words, and boy, it's a great exercise to figure out which words don't need to be there. And so I think trying to make a very compact, tight argument is a great way to start thinking about a book. You'll write pieces like that. I don't know if you do work on that scale, but if you don't, I'd encourage you to think about it because you get feedback from it, and you can tell pretty clearly from the kind of feedback you get whether the topic that you've chosen to write about is of interest to people. If it's not, then probably you might want to keep casting about until you find something that is. It's
Yeah,
more fun to
right.
write about something if other people are going to be interested in it.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the last articles I wrote toward the end of last year got a lot of traction for the topic that I was writing about. First of all, it took, you said it a couple minutes ago, like trying to figure out which words don't belong, right? They say, you've got 1,000 words or 12 or 1,500 words, right? And I've got 3,000 words, right? My first draft is so much bigger than it should be.
Right.
And then the rest of the time is just refining it down. You know this very well. But once it was out there, like, yeah, I mean, actually, that's where I got in touch with this agent. Several agents reached out after that, and one that I really love that I'm working with. Like, it came out of, I've written a ton I shouldn't say a ton. I've written several articles on different topics in the past. This one landed well.
Mm-hmm.
The traction that it got and the feedback that it got was like, oh, the amount of work you put into that paid off.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't flipping. It wasn't just you writing an article on Medium that nobody was editing. It was just out there. I've written a bunch of those in the past where it's just me talking about a topic. It goes nowhere because it might be it's just too much. I didn't think about it really thoroughly, or it's just not interesting. And when you put in the work, then yes, I'm learning a ton about it, about focus, and I'm not very good at it. But I'm glad you kind of pushed back a little bit there. And I think I want to go back a couple minutes ago. You mentioned Nepal because I'm trying to figure out, as you telling your story, what are some of the things that have made you who you are today? Do you think, was it the 2 years in Nepal that kind of shaped you to focus on some of the things that I know you said it didn't change like your career trajectory necessarily, but some of the things you write are really people focused, including this book that I'm really excited to talk about in a few minutes with you, your latest one, which I totally believe in the thesis and in the book itself. I've seen it play out in my life and in the work that I do, so much so. But was it Nepal or were your parents, your siblings, or mentors? Like, what were some of name a couple people or things that happened that kind of shaped you to be this kind of person that does give a damn?
Oh boy, that's an interesting question. I was adopted as an infant. I grew up. Both of my adoptive parents were chiropractors in South Florida, and they divorced when I was 5 or 6 years old. I lived then for the next 7 or 8 years with my mother, and then moved in with my dad and stepmother. So I had kind of a non-traditional growing up, and never felt like I was really very much like my adoptive parents in physically or temperamentally, and so I was always interested in the biological basis of human nature, and read a lot about that growing up, and have continued to. So I think. And then watching my own kids, I have four adult sons now. They come into the world with a stamp on them. They're each different. They're incredibly varied in the ways they see the world and react to it. And I think a lot of that is just innate within us. There's a spin that we come out with that is extremely powerful. Of course, what we learn and what we experience along the way matters enormously too. And so there's a complex mix. I've thought a lot about the role of luck in life,
Mm-hmm.
and we don't know why people do well. Mostly the people who succeed think it's because they were smart and they worked really hard, and they were creative. Well, where do those traits come from? We don't know exactly, but we know they're some complicated mix of your genes and your upbringing, and that's not something you can claim one whit of moral credit for. So
Sure.
even if we were to say, yeah, you did it all by talent and hard work, if you had talent and the inclination to work hard, you're lucky, basically. I think that's a little too simple because working hard actually is difficult, even if you're the kind of person who has a lot of energy and wants to get up in the morning and get to work. Still, there are times when you'd rather not, and you've been knocked down a few times. You don't feel like getting up, but somehow you summon the will to do it. Well, it's hard to do that, and I think if you can claim credit for doing it, you'd be more likely to summon the energy to be able to do it. So
Mm.
yeah, you should pretend that that's not luck. That's all you're doing.
Right.
because it's adaptive to think about it that way. But basically, there's an enormous amount of good fortune involved if you
Yep.
end up in a spot that you feel good about. Wow, there's so many other paths your life could have taken that wouldn't have been nearly as satisfying to you as the one that you did take.
Yeah, I mean, Gary Vaynerchuk talks about this number. He says 400 trillion to one is the odds of you being born. Because if you think about the not only just the sperm and connecting with the egg, but also just like 5 seconds before, 5 seconds
Yeah,
after, or in any other day, like it's just arriving on the earth is the biggest piece of luck. Call it a blessing, call it luck, call it whatever you want, good fortune, but like you shouldn't be here by any like statistical measure, and yet you are, right? And then you mentioned this hard work thing, which I really want to read. I'm going to get your books around that topic and those topics, because I think I've been thinking about this a lot, especially in these last 4 years. We won't get into the political side of things, but just politically, the last 4 years, there's been a lot of conversations about, you know, a lot more talk about billionaires and the plutocrats, and a lot of more talk about should somebody be able to make that much money. And there's a lot of people defending it, saying, well, they worked hard and they did this and they did that. And I'm like, well, I know I grew up in Guatemala. You want to talk about hardworking people? Like I know some people that work harder than Mark Cuban or Jeff Bezos ever have for pennies a day. So it's not just hard
right.
work. It's also not just raw talent. Some of the most amazing, let's just say, musicians or painters that I know, to pick those like artistic talents, they have like 500 followers on Instagram. Like nobody knows who they are. They're incredible, and yet no one knows who they are, right? And
Right.
you can go into any field and find that person, whether it's an amazing doctor or economist or artist. Like it's not just hard work, it's not just luck. There is this tremendous amount of like right place, right time, being in the room where it
Yep.
happens, good fortune that goes into you. And then we got to figure out, okay, now that I've been blessed, I'm lucky to be in the position that I'm in. What do I do with that? How then shall I live to make sure that I give other people the chance to get there or do that,
Well, the first step is to recognize that you were fortunate to be in that position. It's very well demonstrated that if you recognize that, you become very quickly grateful for the fact
Mm,
that you're in that position. And I don't know if you've seen any of the research on gratitude. There's a lot of it now, but it's incredible the breadth and depth of the positive effects that come to people when they experience gratitude for the things that have happened to them in their
yeah.
lives. That makes them much more generous. It makes them much more liked by other people, much more likely to be chosen for the teams they want to be on. There's just a whole broad swath of benefits that come your way if you have the wit to feel grateful for your situation.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. What's again, you've written a bunch of books. As I was looking at Amazon, right? I typed in your name, looking at the books you've written. It kept saying like Robert Frank, and I was like, well, maybe it's a different author. Because a lot of times if it's the same author, you'll show up in the same list. Sure enough, like it looks like 12 or 15 books that you've written. Do you have a favorite that you've written in terms of like how, maybe not how it did sales wise or whatever, but like you felt really good about what you're able to do with that book?
Yeah, I think the one that I have the warmest feeling about is one entitled Passions Within Reason. The
Mm,
subtitle is The Strategic Role of the Emotions. That was the book that tackled the question of how genuine honesty might emerge in a bitterly competitive environment.
interesting.
And yeah, feel like writing that book, I had to learn more almost than any other book I've written. And it was exciting to work through. There were a couple of dead ends that I went down in the process of writing it. It was a big struggle to get past one or two of them, and I've just felt like, wow, I really learned a lot tackling this subject. So yeah,
Now,
that was the book I think I look back with the greatest fondness.
yeah, that's wonderful. Now that's a 1988 book.
Yes.
Have you, and you've written many books since then. What's your journey been like? And I promise you, we're going to get to your book, your new book, because I'm so excited to do it. But you're just endlessly fascinating. The things that you've written about, maybe we'll have to do part 2 and 3 of this someday. But what's been your experience as a writer? Like growing, again, that was 22 years ago at this point that you wrote, no, 30 years ago that you wrote that book. Like what have you seen yourself? Have you felt yourself become a better writer, leading up to this book? Or have you always been kind of naturally inclined to write?
I always did well in written work, and each of my sons is a gifted writer. I would say their mother is a gifted writer. Her mother was
Wow.
was a gifted writer, and so was her father. So I think there is an inclination to write that some people have more than others. So yeah, it's always been something that I like to do, but really it's a craft more than anything. And I think writing a newspaper column for many years and having to make word limits was probably one of the most useful steps in my development as a writer. I mentioned in my preface to the most recent book, the E.B. White writer's manual, where he recounts Strunk's dictum to the students, one of whom was E.B. White. He said, omit needless words, omit needless words, omit needless words. He said it 3 times. And obviously, you only need to say it once. You could omit some words if you didn't say it the second and third time. But you don't want to always omit words. Sometimes if you don't say it a couple of different ways, people won't get it or they won't remember it. But basically, getting rid of the needless words really is an important skill to hone as a writer. And I think writing with a word limit is one of the best crucibles to gather that skill. So yeah, I think I've gotten better. I could not have written the most recent book had I not written each of the other books.
Sure.
But I worked hard on all of them. I did the best I could at the time with each of them. I think I'm better now than I was in the early going, but I don't look back and read excerpts from those books and say, oh, I don't feel embarrassed. I think that still sounds okay to me.
That's beautiful. No, that's really fun. I recently, one of my clients that I work with, I had to rewrite. He's a well-known speaker, and I had to rewrite his onstage bio that they'd read before he comes up to speak. And obviously, no one's speaking right now because of the pandemic. And he had me rewrite this thing, and that omit needless words. Like I went to town with that and really crafted this. I mean, I spent just on a bio. I spent like 4 hours writing this bio, and he had one that was like, it was fine, but I rewrote it. And when he finished, he called me up after he got it. And he said, I just read this aloud. He said, I've never read anything out loud about myself that sounded this good and this like fluid. And then he did go speak to at one event using that bio. And he said they usually just do like a couple lines from it. And she said they loved the bio so much they read the entire, it was like 50 something seconds, like read aloud. And instead of just doing the quick, like, hey, this is so-and-so, welcome into the stage, they read the whole thing. And I attribute it to that. For most of it, I did omit needless words. And then some of it, there was kind of like using extra words to really accentuate certain points. So that's really fun. I just wanted to hear a little bit more about your like process as a writer, because I hope to do more writing in the future. Okay, let's get to your new book, which I'm so thrilled about on multiple levels. And those will come out as we're talking about it. You begin the book by sharing this quote from George Washington, 1780. Example, whether it be good or bad, has a powerful influence. And of course, your new book is called Under the Influence: Putting Peer Pressure to Work. Before we jump into the contents of it, and it's been a joy to like read this book because it's challenged me and it's also encouraged me. It's also confirmed so many things that I feel like I'm working toward myself, as my family, my company. Let's Give a Damn. Lots of conversations happening on the climate crisis that we're in, and oddly enough, peer pressure and how that works into it. So this is all just a wonderful, like serendipitous moment for me. How did the book come about? Again, you're writing tons of books. Your last one was just 4 years ago. So what was the impetus for writing a book, not just peer pressure, but one focused on how it could have a tremendously positive effect on our climate crisis.
Yeah, this book, like several earlier ones, as I mentioned earlier, arose out of a newspaper column. I think I published it in January of 18, could have been then. Uh, it was about the question of regulating smoking. And the thesis was that although we regulated smoking on the grounds that we needed to protect innocent bystanders from the harms caused by secondhand smoke exposure, there had just been some studies out of Japan documenting that if you were exposed to secondhand smoke, you're more likely to get certain illnesses. That in fact, that the damage from secondhand smoke exposure was minuscule compared to the damage that you suffered from actually being a smoker.
Hmm.
If you don't think it's the government's job to protect you from harming yourself, I think that was the regulatory bias that led us to where we were when those regulations were passed. No, we can't protect you from harming yourself. That's your job. If we're going to tell you you can't do what you want to do, it's because of the John Stuart Mill harm principle. He said the only legitimate reason for the state to rein you in is to prevent you from causing harm to others. And so now they had an excuse. If you smoke, you're going to cause harm to others by exposing them to secondhand smoke. Well, set aside the question of whether you harm yourself. Of course you do. And I think the question of whether we would want the state or some other entity to intervene against things we do when we're young that compromise the quality of our lives when we're older, that's a more interesting question, the behavioral scientists now know, than when John Stuart Mill was writing more than 100 years ago. But set that question to one side. The real harm you do if you smoke is you make other people more likely to smoke. So suppose you have a daughter, you're worried she's going to become a smoker. It doesn't make any difference to assess the risk of that happening by knowing that she's a science fiction buff, that she's a Minnesota Twins fan, that she's a star in math. None of that tells you anything. What you need to know is the fraction of her friends who smoke. And it's a huge effect. There's no other effect nearly as big. If that fraction goes from 20% to 30%, then she becomes 25% more likely to become or remain a smoker as a result of that. There's no other effect remotely that big. And so if you smoke, you harm other people by making them more likely to smoke. Now, some people pushed back on that comment to, well, that's their problem. They have agency. They have the responsibility to decide which peers to copy and which ones to avoid. Okay, I like the sentiment that motivates that objection. But what about all the people in the smoker's life? I don't know if you have kids. If and when you have kids, you are never going to sit. No one's ever going to hear you say, "I hope my kids grow up to be smokers." What a bizarre thing for any parent to say. Every parent hopes his kids will grow up to be healthy, and part of that is to encourage them not to smoke. They invest quite a bit in that effort. I certainly did with my kids. I did everything I could to encourage them not to smoke. You can't push too hard or you'll make them more likely to smoke. They'll need to declare their independence by smoking. But if they fail to achieve that goal, don't they suffer some real injury? It's hard to measure, of course, but it's a real injury nonetheless. And so what we know is that if more people smoke, millions more parents will fail to achieve the perfectly legitimate goal and laudable goal of raising their kids to be non-smokers and will be injured by that. And so my claim in the book is that completely satisfies Mill's harm principle. Can we tell you not to smoke because it harms others? Yes, it harms others by making them more likely to smoke. And if you don't care about the harm that causes to them, then care about the harm that it causes to their parents, who have no recourse. There's nothing they can do to avoid that harm. So that's the thesis of the book in the nutshell. The psychologists have long said it's the situation, not the person. by which they mean if we see somebody do something strange and we want to know why did she do that, our tendency is to think, well, what kind of traits of personality does she have? What's her character like? That's generally not the right path to follow when you're looking for an explanation. You should really focus on the social situation that surrounded her when she acted. And so we've known that for a long time. I think most psychologists even underestimate how strong that effect is when it applies to themselves. Yeah, they think other people are influenced by the
Sure.
social situation, but me, no, I'm not so much influenced by it. They think we are all influenced by it, and as I try to explain in the book, that's not such a bad thing actually. Uh, but the 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 other obvious truth is that the causal arrows go also in the other direction. What we do influences the social environment. The social environment influences us for good and ill, for ill in the case of smoking, but also for good in
Sure.
many cases. But what's the social environment? It's a consequence in the aggregate of what we do. So the smoking rate, what's that? That's the number of us who smoke divided by the total number of us. And yet none of us worries about whether when we smoke we'll encourage other people to smoke because we don't have a very big effect on the smoking rate. We're a tiny atom in a big sea. So rational people generally don't worry about their effect on the social environment. But wouldn't the world be better if they did? And so the question I pose in the book is, are there practical ways that we could encourage people to act as if they cared about their effect on the social environment? And if there were those ways, maybe we should consider adopting them. And as I try to explain, there are a host of ways that we could do that, and most of them wouldn't involve any great sacrifice of liberty or quality of life or any such thing. So I think it's a, I call it a policy greenfield. Yeah, maybe you know the entrepreneurial term of an investment greenfield. So there are all
Mm-hmm.
these products and services that never could
Mm-hmm.
have existed until the iPhone came out. Uh,
Yep.
and then investors were stumbling all over themselves to bring them to market, all these opportunities that suddenly you could take advantage of. In the policy domain, I think there's something quite similar. You know, we've never taken seriously the fact that peer behavior is such a powerful influence on people and that it might be shapeable, moldable to our advantage through simple steps of public policy.
Going back a couple steps, you mentioned kids. The the most profound thing that I've ever done for myself is have kids. For a number of reasons. You said you had four. You said you have four sons. Yeah. Like, I have learned so much about myself and about the human race and condition and who we are and how things happen. And the peer pressure thing, again, I've never experienced that more than with kids. You know, you get upset. This happens occasionally, and every time I kick myself and have to get down on both knees and ask my kids for forgiveness. But you know, they get a little crazy, right? One yells at the other sibling. And the way that I get them, you know, I come in from a long day of work or from a trip or whatever, and you know, they're yelling. And they don't need to yell. Like, why are you yelling? That's a talk situation. And the way that I get them to not yell at each other is by yelling at them or maybe not yelling, but raising my voice. Stop yelling at your sister. You need to talk that through. And they're looking at me, probably thinking, what the hell, Dad? Like, you're over here just like yelling at me. And, you know, that happens enough times. And they're learning now, you know, they're yelling at each other more often if I keep going down that path. And we've had stages like that in our parenting where we really have to reevaluate and say, these kids are watching everything we're doing. They're emulating it. And they are being, you know, there is a peer pressure emulation because, of course, they're looking up to us. They're looking to us for direction. So who's pressuring them to behave certain ways? Well, it's us in both ways, to have good behavior, but also when we're not thinking about it well, we're pressuring them to do bad things by not responding consistently to the kinds of things they're doing. So I just wanted to make that comment that I still have a lot to learn in terms of peer pressure, right? But it's I've never seen it more real than right now. About how people are watching what we're doing.
Right.
And they will, if we make a persuasive enough argument, whether consciously or unconsciously, if we make a persuasive enough argument, they're going to follow our lead, especially these little kids who are 5, 6, and 7, like they're just waiting for us to take the lead and tell them what to do. And that's just one. I mean, I've royally screwed myself up as a parent sometimes, but that was one case where like I think about that all the time, and I try to I've used that as an example to teach myself, like, Nick, you've got to pay attention. They're watching everything, So what are some other ways? I know that you talked about the smoking, and then we've kind of parlayed that into the main point of the book, which is the climate crisis.
Right.
Like, let's talk about this peer pressure thing, right? Because we're in kind of an interesting time where you have, maybe more than other countries, other kind of technologically advanced, intellectually advanced countries in the world. Ours, for some reason, and I could be wrong, but our country, there seems to be a huge number of people that don't even believe that there is a climate crisis, right? So we're not talking about, any number of other things. We're talking about, I just heard it yesterday, very smart, I guess smart is the correct word to use them. I saw this interview with Candace Owens. She's a young, communicator leader in her space, very conservative. And she, on the Joe Rogan show, said, I do not believe in climate change. I believe the climate's always changing. And she gave yesterday the weather was hot and now it's cold today. The climate's always changing. But she said, and she's a smart, kind of learned person, and she said, I don't believe in climate change. So, and she's representative of kind of a big swath of Americans that also believe that it's not happening. So how do you, beyond having like a common understanding that climate crisis is happening, okay, let me peer pressure you into some simple things, and we'll talk about those simple things in a second. How do we do that in a country where millions of people don't even believe it's happening?
Until recently, I think that would have been a much bigger problem than it is today. I mean, it wasn't very long ago that we saw a Republican senator bring a snowball into the Senate as proof that climate change wasn't happening. It was late February in Washington, D.C., 2015.
Yep.
Normally the cherry blossoms are about to burst forth then, but some years there are cold snaps and it snowed. So this was his proof. He brought a snowball in. I think we would not see him do that today. He was ridiculed for doing it when he did it, but I think the extreme weather events, my two youngest sons, they're both over 30, neither one of them has ever been alive during a month whose average temperature was cooler than the average temperature for that same month during the entirety of the 20th century. The graphs of temperature over 19 of the last 20 years have been the hottest years on record, going back as far as we have even tree ring records to judge before there were weather services. The evidence is so clear now, the frequency of storms, the intensity of them, the droughts, the wildfires. I think the climate conversation has pushed past the point you've just described. Now we're at a point where we most of us, and you found an example yesterday of somebody who's not in this set, but most of us now say, yes, this is a problem. Yes, we need to do something about it, but nobody has a clear sense that there's anything we can do about it, or that if there were such a thing that we could do about it, that it would be at acceptable costs and the like. So I think that's where the conversation needs to move forward now. And I think there are very productive ways for it to move forward. There are things we can do about it. I listened to Ezra Klein's conversation with Saul Griffiths. I don't know if you listen to his podcast, but it's one of the good ones.
Yes.
And Saul Griffiths is probably he's the most knowledgeable person I've come across about the engineering details of what it would actually take to get the carbon dioxide emissions level down to zero, and maybe even to suck some CO2 out of the air. It's absolutely doable. It would require a massive mobilization akin to what we did during World War II. That was trillions of dollars a year in today's money, but we did it, and the country wasn't unhappy while we were doing it. We were engaged. We were locked in a battle against an adversary that we knew we had to defeat. So we know we can do it. And then the question is, how will we pay for it? It's not enough that the rich people install solar panels and buy Teslas. It's got to be everybody doing it, or else we won't get the emissions level to where they need to be. So it's going to be a massive amount of money. But because of the ways we influence one another in terms of how we spend our money, it's very easy to see that there is massive waste in our spending patterns. And not only that there is massive waste, but that there would be quite simple steps we could take to deflect the waste that's now going down a rat hole and steer it instead into, well, there are two things we need to do. One is to decarbonize the economy. That's probably the biggest threat we face. But pandemics are a more immediate threat, and the private healthcare model doesn't invest in surge capacity for hospitals. There weren't lots of unused ventilators sitting around ready to be deployed in an emergency. That's the private business model doesn't encourage that. We weren't investing as heavily as we had reason to believe we ought to have been in vaccine research and the like. But there's money available to do those things if we recognize where the waste is and how to channel those wasted dollars into the more productive dollars where they need to go.
Yeah, that's super helpful. You mentioned Ezra Klein, who I'm a big fan of. I'm kind of upset at him all the time because he's like 2 years younger than me and like 50 times smarter. But that's a conversation for another day. But his wife, Annie Lowry, who is also, have you read anything by Annie?
Yes, I know Annie. Yeah.
Yeah. So she'll be on my podcast soon to talk.
UBI?
To talk about her book, Give People Money, which I was a big supporter of, I still am, but he's not running anymore, of Andrew Yang. I thought Andrew did a really excellent job. I think Andrew was what America wanted. They wanted someone that wasn't a career politician, but they also needed, what they didn't know they needed was someone who is also smart, intelligent, wise, and measured in how they speak and act and make decisions.
I'll send you something I've written about UBI.
I'd love to read it.
I'm actually in favor of a kind of a hybrid, a very, very small UBI, but then supplemented by an open offer to perform useful public jobs.
Oh, interesting. See, I'm a huge fan. Yeah, maybe not maybe it's not Annie's version of UBI or Andrew Yang's version of UBI, but I think it's inevitable with what we have coming right now. This technology and work revolution that's coming. There are so many people. I just interviewed this wonderful woman for this other. I'm hosting a web series for this other company, a client of mine, and one of the people I interviewed was she's a frontline worker during this pandemic. She's a trucker, and she leads this group of women truckers. There's like 5,000 of them, in this like predominantly male. And one of the questions I had for her was like, are you like, what are you thinking about the future? Like, Tesla is already driving trucks across the country unmanned. I think Budweiser did a few trucks across the country, unmanned. Like, we're a few years away. Like, and she was very positive and like, no, we'll figure it out and everything. But I'm like, man, there are, from farming to, any production line that's gone. Truckers, like, we're talking millions and millions of jobs. Like, we have to think of something, and we're seeing it right now, Robert. Like with this pandemic, it is accentuating, it is highlighting so many inefficiencies from healthcare, which our healthcare does not work. It's tied to 39 million jobs that were just lost. Income inequality, all of these things. Like, we're still at $7.25 an hour minimum wage, when if you looked at the trajectory of our economy, it should be like 22 or 23 at the very least. And we're still stuck at $7.25. Like, we're working people to death for jobs they don't like, and we're paying them next to nothing to do it.
Yeah, no, it's in need of some work.
So, and that is, speaking of UBI, like, that is one, I'm very interested in these things that are happening right now, including climate crisis stuff, that I'm trying to figure out, I'm really glad we got connected on this conversation because I am leading I have a company, Let's Give a Damn. We do social impact consulting. I'm writing a book. I speak. I do all these things under this company. But with the podcast and our online platform with social media and otherwise, I'm constantly getting people asking me, how do I psych myself into giving a damn? How do I convince myself to get out of this stupor I'm in because life is hard, right? And then how do I get my friends and neighbors? Like the question comes all the time. We had a Nashville kind of got a double whammy right before this pandemic. We had an F4 tornado come through. It wreaked havoc on our city. And we were 1 week into the cleanup for that when they started telling people to stay home because of the pandemic. So there's a lot of places in Nashville that are still suffering and hurting because we couldn't keep doing a lot of this stuff. Anyway, when the tornado came through on March 3, I am kind of this like doer, go-getter. I just went out. And started looking for stuff to do. I don't kind of wait for permission to do anything. And I linked up with some friends and we were figuring out this project. One of my friends, 3 of his businesses were demolished by the tornado. So we're with him, helping him out. And I started on Instagram, just kind of updating people on what I was doing, but also saying like, hey, if you want, like, I'm here, I'm going to start something. I don't know what it is right now, but I'm going to get to work. Do you want to help me? Do you want to join up with me? And by the end of the day, we had 80 something people in a WhatsApp group.
Wow.
And we were rocking and rolling. I started, and what was cool about that moment though, is I learned a lot about stepping up and why people are always looking for somebody to do it first, right? Like so many people don't take that initiative, whether it's climate crisis or otherwise. They're waiting for somebody to show them how to do it. But then once they get going, I learned so much about my human fellow Nashvillians during this project because all of a sudden I thought, man, okay, I've got a family at home still. I have work to do. I have clients that need me, but I'm going to be out here doing this as long as I can. And now I have 80 people that are going to be looking to me for direction. That's not how, once I kind of cast the initial vision and they were saying, what are we supposed to do? And I'm like, friends, there's no rule book. Like a tornado just came through. You just look for something to do and you either lead the effort or link up with someone who started leading the effort. And within one day, I didn't have to lead anything. I was back to leading myself and helping other people because they were all just like, I looked behind me and nobody was following me anymore. They were all off doing their thing now. And so I learned a lot through that situation, even as a 36-year-old, about peer pressure and taking the initiative in that circumstance, and then watching people kind of get the energy themselves to get to work.
Yeah, I think experiences like that and thinking about the dynamics of what drives behavior like that is really what changed my mind about the efficacy of individual action in the climate domain. As an economist, I was always skeptical of, I don't know if you use the term conscious consumption. It's the term that some climate advocates use for individual steps to reduce your carbon footprint. So you drive a little less often, you eat less meat. Things where you, at some sacrifice or cost to yourself, take a step that reduces the amount of CO2 you emit into the atmosphere. And I think economists and many climate scientists too have been long skeptical of that as a distraction, really. What we really need to do is invest massively in green energy infrastructure. We need to adopt a very stiff carbon fee and dividend system. If we don't take big steps like that are going to really change the course of the ship of the big producers and the gross energy use patterns, then we're not going to get out of the mess that we're in. And so individual action, well, it's not going to matter much. And so don't get distracted by that. That was always my view too, but I've completely changed my mind about that after working on this project. And really it's a couple of things that led me there. One, the less important, but it's still a big one, is that when you take action, it's true that the effect of that is small in relationship to the size of the whole problem. Certainly it's negligible even. If you didn't do it, the world would be the same as if you did do it. If everybody else did it and you didn't do it, well, that would be good, but that would be good whether or not you did it. So the fact is, when you take one of these steps, I think one of the clearest examples would be installing solar panels. There's a great pioneering study that was done early in the adoption cycle where the authors were able to estimate that if a new addition, a new installation took place at time zero, then within 4 months on the average, there would be a second one caused by people having seen that first one and reacted to it by deciding to install one of their own. That would be over and above any other installations that would have occurred independently of that first one. So after 4 months, you've got not one, but two installations. After 8 months, you've got four. After a year, you've got eight. After 2 years, you've got 32. One new guy puts it up
One person.
on, and you got 32 after. But that's not the end of it. You got each of those people talking to others in other zip codes, relatives around the country, friends. And so they're installing panels because the first guys did. And so it fans out. So the indirect effects, the things that happen because others saw what you did and decided to take similar action, those are huge compared to the effect of your own action. But that's the small part of the reason I changed my mind. The bigger part is that when you do stuff like that, when you ride your bike instead of driving, eat less meat, that changes who you are as a person. And I think here too, economists, we tend to assume that people come into the world with fully formed identities and preferences. No, that's not the way it works at all. We become who we are gradually over the course of a lifetime. You're not who you were a week ago, and you become who you are by what you do. That was Aristotle's view. We are what we repeatedly do. It's been distilled by modern people writing about him. And so when you take these steps, if you weren't a climate advocate to begin one, you gradually become one, or if you were one, you become more of one. And the significance of that is that it makes you much more likely to vote for politicians who will enact stiff carbon fee and dividend systems, who will vote for the investments that we need to make to decarbonize the economy. And so it's not only not a distraction from the policies we need to adopt, it's a positive step toward getting them adopted.
I've seen that happen, Robert, over the last few years. In our family specifically. So you don't know this about me or us, but I help people with a lot of different issues and topics, right? Because of the work that I do, I have all sorts of people come on the show. But our family, like our personal issue, is addressing the climate crisis in the ways that we can. Everything from, I guess it's been 5-6 years ago, we became vegetarian. And so our kids, our son, who's 5, has never had meat, and our daughters, had it a few times when they were toddlers, but didn't have it a lot. So they don't miss it at all. And we've been able to properly educate them and tell them why we're doing it. It's not even a financial choice. Like grass-fed beef is expensive. It's not even about that. We did that for the last year when we were eating meat. Was we got our beef from a farm down the road. We split a beef with some friends, and we got our eggs from a farm, whatever. So it's not even that. It is directly tied to, we feel better, not just about ourselves, like health-wise. We feel tremendously better since becoming vegetarian, but we feel better about what we're able to do. And we have convinced family members. I come from a large family. I have 11 siblings, 12 kids. Several of them are either like 75% vegetarian or 100% vegetarian now. We also compost, and we've gotten several of our neighbors and our friends in on the composting thing. It's little things, right? Like a year ago, we switched from regular trash bags to compostable bags. It's an easy fix. I know that not everybody can do that. They're a little more expensive, but it's not that much more expensive to buy biodegradable compostable bags instead of using these plastic ones, which will be here, forever and a day from now.
And do you feel that those changes in your own behavior have pushed you politically in terms of a greater willingness to support candidates who will adopt policies that will help us?
1,000%.
Yeah, in my own case, I've felt much more inclined to make donations to candidates who I think will adopt the policies that I feel we need to adopt to get out of this mess. And it's really such a dramatic step you can take by doing that. You know, if you look to your neighboring state, Virginia, you know, that's a pretty middle of the road state politically. They were red, they're trending blue, they're not radical, wild-eyed liberals by any stretch
No.
of the imagination, and they flipped both houses of the state legislature in their last round of elections, 2019. And just a month ago, they adopted one of the most ambitious decarbonization laws of any government anywhere. They're going to be carbon-free by a relatively early date, and you know, that's going to require a lot of doing. But if you vote for the right people, you can make big change happen in a hurry.
On that same note, I'm looking something up here because I wanna read it off and let me see if I can find it here. So on that note of the politicians, so what happens if it's easy to get discouraged if you look at what's happening at a very high federal level, right? Like just was it yesterday, the day before? Like more deregulations happened. You know,
Yes.
giving companies and corporations and organizations more leeway to do whatever the hell they want, regardless of the effect that it has on our climate and on other things. But there's still I guess what I'm asking is there are so many things that are enacted at a federal level that in some ways do affect what's happening within the states, but not all the time. So how do we pay attention to what's happening at a federal level? Because that matters. It does matter. But also really see the importance of focus. Like so many people think their one time to get involved in elections is presidential election every 4 years. And they forget that there are, you know, everything from council members to mayors to, you know, Senate seats to House seats. Like there's so much, in other words, the thing I was trying to look up was there between president and House and all these different seats, there are hundreds of seats up for grabs this year, hundreds. And most of them are going to go fairly unvoted for. Like it'll be a small number of people actually casting their vote. So how do we keep those in tension where like, yeah, it sucks certain things that are happening at a federal level, but a lot of that doesn't matter, but it still does. You see like the tension there.
Yeah, you got to keep many balls in the air at once. There are some pivotal Senate contests coming up. And who controls the Senate is probably the biggest determinant of how much progress we're going to make in the next 4 years, undoing some of the damage you just described. If the Senate flips, there'll be a huge difference in the policies that we adopt going forward in the next 4 years. But you're right, those other slates of office holders at the state level, at the county level, at the local level, that's all important in building a bench for the future and in enacting policies that matter to each of us even now.
Yeah.
The levels of government up and down the ladder all matter.
Yeah, that's super helpful. I'm trying to do that. I mention it when every chance I can for people to get involved. They should know. I mean, they should know who their council women and men are. You should know those names just as much as you should know who your congressmen and women are, who your senators are. Like you got to know what's happening next door just as much as you know what's happening, because those are all. They're not, you know, your mayor is not affecting what's happening even at a state or national level, but it's affecting you. It's affecting sidewalks. It's affecting, you know, if there are coal plants still, you know, or if there are companies that aren't helping the environment in your zip code, like that matters.
My wife was a Ithaca City Councilwoman for some years, and it was a joy to watch them. They were all smart. There are 10 of them on the council. They would have long, heated discussions, and you know, watching them, that their aim was to get the right answer. They weren't posturing. They weren't engaged in partisan pissing contests. They were just trying to get the right version of the statute enacted to benefit the community. And that's what government can and should do. Government has not been doing that,
Yeah.
but in other countries, government does do that. Look at New Zealand. Look at Canada, and the Nordic countries. There are many governments who are viewed by their citizens as delivering good value for their tax dollars. They're thought to be above corruption by and large. To have a bad government is a curse, and if you bash the government all the time, if you say government's the problem, not the solution, it's hard to get good people to go work in the government, and that's not in our interest, as we've discovered to our pain in recent months, especially.
Yeah, we shouldn't be super agreement with everything you just said, and we shouldn't be like so much of me wants to not pay attention to what's happening in politics because it's just so hard just to read and deal with and navigate it and what's true and what's not and what about this and what about that. But the reality is more of us should be taking the posture that agree with them or not. More of us should be taking the posture of the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortezes and the Ilhan Omars, like even at a young age saying, no, I want in. Like I want in now. I want to grow up in this. I don't want to just say like, I don't just want to shit on government. I want to actually be the, not to use the kind of cliche, but like be the change that I wish to see in government
Yeah.
instead of rejecting it and saying, just forget about it. We're going to do it on our own here. Like we got to go in there and make the change.
Well, that's why behavioral contagion is a really useful frame for thinking about all of this, because I think one of the things that discourages people from getting involved is the sense that they won't be able to make a difference.
Yep.
And the fact is, I have a slide of Greta Thunberg at age 14. She's sitting with her back up against a school building, hugging her knees. She's got a sign announcing some climate rally that nobody came to. And I think when she started out, she probably hoped she would have some influence on events, but she can't possibly have imagined that she would shape hundreds of millions of people's lives the way she has over the course of the last couple of 3 years. And the power of example so magnifies the little things that you do. And I think it's very hard to appreciate the leverage that you have. Now, sometimes things fizzle out and nothing much happens, but
Sure.
it's like having a lottery ticket. I'll take a small step, somebody will see it, they'll take a similar step that'll influence two others and then four others, and you'll see an explosion. And so get involved. There's great pleasure in being involved just for the experience of it, but it's not pissing in the wind. It's likely to have an impact.
Yeah. There's just that's a whole other conversation around like in this day where everyone wants to become TikTok famous or Instagram famous or have like a viral thing happen to them, people are trying too hard, right? And after 10, 15, 20 times of trying to do something and it doesn't work, we get discouraged because our motivation was wrong. Our reason for doing it was wrong.
Right.
Greta Thunberg had no idea anyone was watching her. It's not like she filmed a secret camera crew to take those photos and to like keep coming back every Friday for Climate Fridays. And like people love to shit on Greta because she's so young and she's talking so authoritatively. I'm all about it because sure, maybe she says something every once in a while. It's like, do you actually know about that? That's not the point. I don't care. We all mess up. We all say things that we shouldn't, and we all step into territory that maybe we shouldn't sometimes. That's not the point. The point is what you just said about this the contagious nature of this is we have to be true to who we are, and we have to seek to do good, regardless of whether anyone ever follows us in doing it or not. I think of Yusra Mardini, who is an Olympic swimmer. She and her sister, she was on the refugee Olympic team last Olympics, right? And I'm interviewing her next month. I'm so excited because she and her sister pulled their refugee boat for hours. We're talking miles and miles of swimming with their boat. Like, you don't know you're just trying to stay alive at that point. You're not focused on, and all of a sudden this story, they get to shore, they live, and now, they live in Germany. And she's now this amazing example of resilience and strength and power to overcome mean, they could have just sat helplessly in the boat and said, okay, this is it. Like, we're in the middle of a storm. We can't get to shore. This is our lot in life. She got out of the boat. She swam to shore. Now they're all alive because of it. And I constantly think about, what we do and what we do when no one's looking, right? Like, keep doing the right thing when no one's looking.
Right.
Keep doing what you truly believe you should be doing. And it might take one time or 50 or 100 or 1,000, or you may never get recognized for it, right? Like, or maybe you'll get barely recognized for the tremendous work you're doing. We don't get to, again, good fortune, luck. There's all sorts of things involved in there. But yeah, that's a whole different conversation there. What are some of the, as we begin to wrap up here, because I want to respect your time. What are some, I know I've mentioned a couple things that my family and I have done as an example to other people, but as you've done this, as you wrote this book, and I have to be honest, I haven't finished it yet. But like, what are some things that you have found that do, in other words, I want you to kind of push people in their imagination right now as they begin to think about, what can I do? Like, in terms of the climate crisis conversation, what are some of the things that people can begin thinking about? Small little changes. We're not talking about solar panels tomorrow. You mentioned the solar panel thing, and the only reason I want to get a house, we've rented for 12 years because we've moved all over the country. But the one reason, literally in the top 3 reasons for getting a house, is so that I can put solar panels in it to begin to be an example in that way, in kind of a very explicit way. Like, hey, we drive the Prius, and as soon as I can afford an electric car, we're getting one. Like, we're doing all these things in our world, like, but that's a very visible thing,
Right.
solar panels. So what are some things that people can begin to do, like, right now as they come out of our conversation?
Well, you mentioned solar panels. Actually, that's an interesting story for us because we tried 3 years ago to get solar panels, and we had the company come out and they did their assessment, and they said, well, actually, our orientation wasn't quite right, and there were some trees that were going to block too much of the sun during the day, and they didn't think we were a good candidate for installing solar panels. And so, well, too bad, we're not going to go down that route, it looks like. And then they sent out an email last year saying that they were building solar farms in the acreage all around Ithaca, and that we, as somebody who had thought about doing solar panels on a rooftop but couldn't, could consider the alternative of buying a share in a solar farm. And so we
Interesting.
investigated, and we did end up buying a share in a solar farm. Now we get power for 2 or 3 cents a kilowatt hour, while the NYSEG customers are paying 10 or 11, and it's going to keep on going up. But I still felt that, well, we didn't really, we weren't able to serve as an example to others, because how the hell does anybody know that we're
Right.
part owners in a solar farm? And so I talked to the CEO of the company about that. I said, well, actually, we have a very simple solution. And he went into his office and came out with this red sign announcing, we've gone solar. And so we've got a nice red sign out in front of our house, so people know that even though they can't see solar panels on a rooftop, that
That's what you're
we're
using.
and yeah, I ride my bike most places I go, at least when it's not icy out. We have an abandoned meat altogether, but we don't eat nearly as much meat as we used to, and we're thinking that'll phase out in a way similar to the way it has for you. Uh, and we recycle everything. We compost. The Ithaca is a great community that way. They have a place where you can take your food scraps in compostable bags and drop them off, and the Cayuga Compost Company sells this magnificent, rich compost. We buy it back from them, knowing that it was made out
Yep.
of the very waste we had thrown into the bin. So yeah, we're doing little things, but I think for me, the thing I'm most eager to do is to talk to people like you and others who in turn talk to lots and lots of other people. And I'm not, at my age, I don't really stand to profit by getting greater renown than I've managed to acquire up until now. I don't have much time left on the earth. I want to do as much as I can for the causes I care about, and I think that caring about people going forward, climate's got to be first on your list. The pandemics will come again, and
Yep.
they'll go, but the The climate thing is orders of magnitude more threatening. The study that frightened me most was one showing that if the CO2 level reached a certain threshold, that there would be zero cloud cover anywhere on the Earth. And if that threshold was reached, then the temperature rise, in addition to whatever other rise occurred from other effects that are known to be happening, the temperature rise over and above all that would be 14 degrees Celsius. And that means everything's going to die, everything's going to burn up. And so uh, if we let that happen, how do we defend having let that happen? This is a solvable problem. Tell your listeners to go Google Ezra Klein's podcast with Saul Griffiths and listen to him.
I'll link to it. Yep.
He'll persuade you that this is something we can do, and then have them go out and buy my book, or if they can't afford it, send me an email. I'll send them a PDF of the final manuscript, and I hope that will persuade them that this is something we can pay for without forcing anybody to make any painful sacrifices. It's we're not going to tax the poor to pay for all this. We're not going to even tax the people in the middle. They don't have enough. It's got to be the wealthy who pay the extra taxes, and they're going to resist. Why? Because they're not worried that somebody's got a proposal that's going to keep them from buying what they need. That's not on the table, obviously. What are they worried about then? Well, they won't be able to buy what they want.
Yep.
What are the special extras they want? Those are all scarce things that are special. They're in short supply. How do you get those things? You get them by outbidding other people like you who want them.
Yep.
And this just in. When your taxes go up, their taxes go up too. And so your relative bidding power is exactly the same as if your taxes didn't go up. You'll be able to buy the same penthouse apartment with a sweeping view of the city as you would have if your taxes hadn't gone up. So that's the magic in the behavioral contagion analysis. It shows how, because we influence one another, we need heavier cars because the others have one and we're at greater risk. If we don't have a heavy one, we're more likely to die. When we all buy heavier cars, we're all more likely to be injured or killed.
Yep.
If we all had smaller cars, we'd be safer, not more at risk. And so all those things are things we could do, and it wouldn't require any painful sacrifices.
I have thought, I mentioned earlier that I grew up in Guatemala. I've lived, I was born in New York, Rochester, New York, right down the road from Ithaca. So we're from the same area-ish, but grew up in Guatemala, then spent a lot of time living overseas, 6 years living in like 30 different countries. So, and I feel way more comfortable outside the US. My point in saying all that is I've thought so much about expatriating with my family, going to one of these places you said that do take it more seriously. But the thing that I keep coming back to, the thing that keeps me from moving forward in that process is the more people that give a damn that leave this place to go to a country that has already figured it out. Like, the United States needs more people to stay here, raise a ruckus, make some noise, and then be in it for the long term. As painful as that might be to be here long term for me, someone that really wants to live overseas, like, it's going to take thousands of people like me that want to leave but have some measure of influence to help people and push people forward to stay here and say, you know what? Like, we're going to stay here and figure this out. We can do it in our lifetime. We can see this thing change.
Yep. I hear you, and I applaud that. That's terrific.
Yeah. So we'll see. I there's still a chance, but I mean, that's the conversation I'm having with my wife is like, do I want, you mentioned it earlier, like about like, you don't have much time on the earth left. Like with my kids, do I want them to ever even remotely think that Papa moved us to, Germany or to Canada or wherever to run away from the United States who was doing like terrible things at the time? Like, no, I want them to see someone that was a fighter, a good kind of fighter, like a fighter that was going to stay and commit to long-term change. So that's the only thing keeping me here. And I think it will long-term keep me here.
Right
so,
on.
But this was, Robert, this was fascinating, fantastic. I know we didn't get to like half the things I wanted to talk about, but I will link to your book in the show notes. We'll share it online. I know I'm going to go and buy as many of your books as I can. I know there's several titles that really spoke to me, that stuck out to me, that I want to take a look at. I think we have a lot to learn from you. So thank you so much for joining me and us on the Let's Give a Damn podcast today.
And if you've got some openings to steer me to people who you think would like to talk to me about any of this, I'm game. That I'd like to spend more time doing this if I can going forward.
Fantastic. I will definitely do that. I have lots of friends who like to talk and ask questions as well. So we'll connect on that later on. But thank you so much for joining me.
Sounds good.
That's the show today, friends. I hope you were challenged. I hope you enjoyed it. A massive thanks to Robert Frank for joining me on the show today. And thank you all for listening. I created this show. Chad Snavely produced it. Let's Give a Damn is part of the Matter Media family. I am sending so much love and peace to each one of you during these crazy times. Stay safe. Keep giving a damn. Bye for now.